Welcome to the Meeting 5 video. This meeting is a follow-up on your trip, so I hope it was an incredible experience of life change for your team. The goal of this meeting is to process your team's cross-cultural experience and create strategies to share your story and remain connected to the work you visited. One statistic that continues to stick in my mind is that teams who meet and process prior to leaving have a better chance of having a life-changing experience. But it's also shown that for that life change to last, good debriefing and follow-up must happen. The follow-up truly needs to be thought of as a fifth meeting, with the only difference being that it's the only meeting that happens after the trip. Now, there'll be lots of things to cover in a follow-up meeting. People want to share pictures and stories, laugh together, and reminisce. These are all important parts of community building. Sadly, they can overshadow any processing time. There are two options to avoid this. One, I would suggest having two post-trip meetings. At the first, share food, stories, pictures, videos, invite family and friends, make it a party. Then at the second, do an important debrief without the audience of family and friends. Share what you learned, make it a priority as much as the party. Now, the second option is to do them together, but to have very distinct times for each. Maybe the party is from 3 to 4 in the afternoon, but at 4, the group leaves for debrief and one of the family members helps with the cleanup. I would suggest the first way, having two meetings, but I know that it can be difficult for scheduling purposes. So either way, make sure you take time to debrief your experience together. There are three main components to this meeting. First, processing through the many aspects of the trip. Second, learning to tell about the trip to others. And third, thinking through how the trip will impact you moving forward. The time for the material of this section is about 30 minutes, but it's really contingent on your group interaction. I would encourage you to read through the questions and have your team read through the questions for Meeting 5 prior and come prepared to discuss. In the first section, continuing the journey, the questions on this page are meant to start conversations about the experience that your team has had. So one of the temptations with debriefing is to spend the entirety of the time talking about the specific cultural differences or the weather or how long the flights were. It's certainly okay for that to be a starting point. The first question even directs people that way, but these questions are really designed to move into the way that the experience impacted how we think about things. So these are big questions, so know there could be considerable amount of awkward silence as people process, especially if they did not read the questions prior to coming. What was one high point? This is a generic question to simply start conversation. Don't spend a lot of time on this question, as you've probably processed some of this during your trip. What did you learn about yourself? We discussed how culture stress and being with people in community for an extended time can show things about ourselves that may be hidden in our home culture. So what did you learn about the ways you interact in stressful situations? What did you learn about how you interact with others? What did you learn about God? We discussed in the culture section how different cultures read the Bible differently based on their context. As you traveled, did you learn anything about the way the community of God, the community you visited, viewed God? Was it the same way that you viewed God? How was it different? Did it challenge any things about your view of God? What did you learn about God's call? Learning is the first step, but our hope is that the learning we do cross-culture will lead to action. Finally, what's one thing you would change? This question is more helpful for future team planning. On the Writing Your Story page, we talk about how to share your story. Recently, a missions pastor offered some thoughts on how to share your story with your congregation. So if you're interested in seeing an online presentation and reading some of his thoughts, check it out at the Global Strategy website. It's at chaglobal.org. There's a lot of helpful information there. Now, the goal of this section is to talk about our story in terms of an actual storyline. So thinking through characters, setting, problems, and solutions. This activity may not appeal to all people, but it starts to help create a narrative that others can follow. Again, if your team has already processed some of this, and they've looked it over before, you could really quickly move through these questions as they share short answers. Now, telling your story, one of the most challenging aspects of returning home from a missions experience is the lack of ability for others to understand the impact of the experience you had. Many people will ask you about the trip, but there are varying levels at which they want to hear about it. So some are interested only in the polite, oh, it's good. Others want you to show every picture you took. Now, understanding what kind of request you are receiving when someone asks, how was your trip, is really important. In this section, we look at 3 different kinds of people and 3 lengths of stories to tell. Some of the responses to questions on this page are probably in the answers from the first page, but as the activity suggests, be selective. You can't share everything. Give your listener a taste of the experience and encourage them to experience it for themselves. The church lobby is a 30-second story or an elevator speech. It's a quick response for those who don't have time to hear the whole story. This is the response you'll give in the lobby at a church or when someone asks you in passing about your trip at work or at school. Remember, keep it short and clear. The sanctuary story, you now have moved out of the church lobby and into the sanctuary. You've been asked to speak in service, but they don't want you to do the entire teaching time. You're given only 3 to 5 minutes to share about your experience. The 3-minute story helps you think through a little more than the 30-second snippet. So what are 2 to 3 pictures you could use to capture your time? What is one way that you were impacted? What's one relationship you built? Think through what God taught you and share honestly about it. But remember, most people listening have not had your experience. So paint a picture of what God is doing in the place you visited and how your story fits into God's larger work. Finally, the 30-minute story may only be shared with 1 or 2 people. Maybe a spouse or a best friend really wants to hear about your trip, or a small group at church wants you to share for a little longer. This is the time you can bust out your pictures and videos, painting vivid pictures of the life and culture of the place you visited. This is where good storytelling is paramount. Give the setting and characters, express key events and problems and how God worked through the experience. But make sure, as with other discussions, that you see it all in the context of God's overarching story and how you fit into it. Experiencing change. This final page is more introspective and meant to be done on your own. Rather than reading the questions and responding as a group, you might ask this simple question. What does our church do to serve our community? Talk about your church and their specific place of serving locally. If your church isn't serving, think through ways you could encourage people to serve locally. Are there local organizations you can partner with? Finally, end by listing prayer requests. These can be, as the last question suggests, for those you visited. But you can also list prayer requests that each person may have for themselves, ways that they hope to serve and engage, desires to stay connected. Give space to share how you can continue to care for one another as a team, even after the experience is done. Don't miss this opportunity to pray with each other one final time. I want to close by offering a word of thanks to you. You are taking on a huge responsibility to make a difference, not only in the lives of those you're going to serve, but those who are serving. Thank you for taking steps to pour in time and energy so that the experience could have the most impact. Please know that we at Global Strategy and at Church of God Ministries desire to help in any way possible. If you have questions or thoughts, please contact us. We would be happy to connect with you. Now, may the God of hope give you courage and humility as you travel.